All right, in 10.5, we're going to add, subtract, and multiply complex numbers. So we want to first of all just kind of remind ourselves about the square root of -1 being I. This is a lot of review at first right here, okay? But let's look at this. So remember the square root of -1 is I. So as we simplify these guys, let's think through this. Remember, we can take that negative out by taking an I out. And then we look at what is the square root of 4. Well, that's just a 2. And the 2 always goes in the front, so it's going to be 2i. Look at number 2. I can take the negative out with an I, but the 2 is not a perfect square, so it has to stay in the radical. So my answer would be I square roots of 2. Let's look at number 3. All right, I have the 2 outside. I can bring that negative out by taking an I out. And now let's take this 27 and think about perfect squares that give us 27. So there's a 9 times 3. 9 is a perfect square. If I take the square root of 9, I can take out a 3 and multiply it by what's in front. 3 is not a perfect square, so it has to stay in the radical. So what I end up with is 6i square roots of 3. Number 4, I have that negative in front, so I'm going to write it as -1. And I know I can take a negative out by taking that I. Now let's look at 48. Let's factor that down into perfect squares. Well, 48 is 16 times 3. 16 is a perfect square, which means I can take a 4 out. So I have 4 times -1 times I, which gives me -4i. 3 is left under the radical because you can't reduce it further. So it's just -4i square roots of 3. Let's look at this, complex numbers. Complex numbers are a combination of real numbers and imaginary. So the real number always goes in front, and this is what we call standard form. And you always have to write it like this, with the real in the front and the imaginary in the back. All right, so I want you to make sure you're keeping your answers in correct form. Let's look at number 5. As we simplify this down. So I'm going to leave the 5 alone for now, leave the negative alone. I can take that negative out as an I. Then I'm left with 36. Square root of 36 is 6, so it's 6i. So I would leave my answer like this, 5 minus 6i. The imaginary is in the back, the real part's in the front. So let's look at number 2. Negative square root of 18. Well, the negative I know I can come out an I. That leaves me 9 times 2. Well, 9's a perfect square. I can take out a 3. So I have 3i square roots of 2 minus 7. But you can't leave it like that. You have to put it in standard form. So it would be -7 plus 3i square roots of 2. So notice I just moved the real part to the front. Now let's look at adding and subtracting complex numbers. So it's very much like what you learned in Algebra 1, where you collect like terms. We want to remember our basics here, collect like terms, and you always want to look to see if there's a reason for this plus sign in the middle or a negative in the middle. Well, if there's a plus, that's just a +1, and we don't really need the parentheses, so I can drop my parentheses, plus 5 plus 9i. Now I'm just going to combine like terms. I want the real terms in the front. So I'm going to do 3 plus 5 gives me 8. And then I do the imaginary parts in the back. -4i plus 9i, so it's like -4x plus 9x. Treat it the same, would be plus 5i. Let's try another one. What if it's a negative in the middle? Remember, that's like a -1, so I need to distribute that before I drop my parentheses. So I have 7 plus 2i minus 8 plus 5i. Be really careful with your signs. Now we just collect like terms, do the reals first. So 7 minus 8 gives me -1. 2i plus 5i gives me 7i. So -1 plus 7i. All right, let's look at multiplying. So remind yourself for a second that I squared is -1. That's going to be really helpful as we go through this section. And what you want to remember is that you never leave I squared in your answer. Okay, change it to a -1, okay? Never leave I squared in the answer, even if it's there. Convert it to -1 and simplify. Always, always, always. So let's look at number 1. So let's multiply. Real to real, imaginary to imaginary. So I have -8 times -3 gives me a positive 24. I times I gives me I squared. But remember, that's 24 times -1, so I would leave my answer as -24. Number 2, I would distribute first. So I would put -12i plus 6i squared. Well, let's clean that up. -12i I can't do anything with, but plus 6 times -1 means I have a -6, put the real stuff in the front, remember, and the imaginary parts in the back. So -6i minus 12i. Number 3, okay, this is binomial, so we're gonna do FOIL again, where we multiply first, outer, inner, last. Let's do first terms. I get 12. Outer, I get 18i. Inner, I get -8i. Last, I get -12i squared. All right, let's combine our like terms right here. That would give me 18 minus 8 is 10i. Now, look at this -12. That I squared, I need to replace it with a -1 and then multiply it out. So what does this become? Well, this becomes 12 plus 10i plus 12. So now I can combine like terms yet again and get 24 plus 10i. Let's look at number 4. Let's do FOIL again, okay? Just walk it through the process. But before we do FOIL, let's simplify this. Let's simplify this to be an I, not square root of -1. So 3 plus I times 2 plus, what does this simplify to? Well, you can take an I out. What is the square root of 100? It's 10, so it's 10i. Now, let's FOIL. So I'll have 6 plus 3 times that is 30i plus 2i plus 10i squared. All right, if we combine like terms in the middle, I'm going to have 32i. This is really 10 times -1, right? So let's clean that up. So I have 6 plus 32i minus 10, real parts in the front, so -4 plus 32i. Let's look at number 5. Now, when you got something like this, just take them 2 at a time. Don't stress out, just 2 at a time. So first 2, if I get -I squared, well, that's -8 times -1, right? So let's make that just 8. And then I multiply that 3i, that gives me 24i. And then last but not least, let's look at number 6. 5 times 5 minus 2i squared. So I need to expand this guy. So 5 minus 2i times 5 minus 2i, and I'm going to FOIL it. So first terms, I get 25. Outer terms, I get 10i. Inner, -10i. Last, I get plus 4i squared. All right, let's combine like terms. I get minus 20i plus 4. Now let's clean that up. That's times -1, right? So 25 minus 20i minus 4, combine like terms, so I'll have 21 minus 20i. Sometimes it takes a few steps, but you can get this, all right? That would be how we multiply our complex numbers.